The New Orleans Saints are in a very difficult situation. This is from Football Analysis. Let's go ahead and listen to why the Saints, my Saints, our Saints, your Saints, are in a difficult situation, I guess, going into this season.
The New Orleans Saints finished the 2023 season with a 9-8 record and missed the playoffs for the third straight season.
Not good.
They finished top 10 in both points per game offensively and points per game defensively, yet were unable to get to the playoffs. There were a lot of ups and downs throughout the regular season for the Saints in 2023, but their future genuinely concerns me. I know that may seem like a strong statement, but in today's video, we are going to break down everything the Saints have done over the past few years and project what they can do in the upcoming drafts to get better and to get back to the postseason.
Okay, so I'm really looking forward to this because I'm not totally sure who, the channel. I'm not totally sure if they're a Saints fan, if they watch the Saints a lot, if they're just an NFL fan. I just assume they cover the NFL. What I've noticed about outside sources, whether it's in the big sports media or the small sports media or whatever, is that they generally get what the Saints are doing or how the Saints have operated wrong, I think. So I'm interested to hear what he's got to say. I have a sneaky feeling I'm finna pop off in this video. So the juices are flowing.
This team is
today's Good Friday. It's finna be a great Friday by the end of this video, you know what I'm saying?
Frustrating because there's times where they look like they can compete with anybody and be a true tough out in the playoffs, but there's other times where they look like a team stuck in mediocrity. And that's where I think they are. Sure, they'll have flashes like when they beat the Bucs by 10 points in a Week 17 game, in a game where Tampa committed 4 turnovers and the Saints defense was clicking, but there's other times like when they lost to Tampa earlier in the year by 17 points and didn't look like they belonged on the same field.
Totally different scenario. Carr was hurt. Alvin Kamara's first game back. A lot of issues. Okay, now obviously we shouldn't have had the performance we did. Like, that was not good, no doubt about it. But it's very, very different situations, okay? And something that it drives me crazy when people do this is they say the Saints are a team that's in mediocrity. They're not a playoff team, whatever. But if the Saints would have done what the Bucs did last year as far as like results, like if they would have snuck in, won the NFC South, which they could have, it wouldn't have been crazy. Sneak in, they beat Philadelphia. Philadelphia's struggling in the playoffs, whatever. Like, no one is saying these same things about Tampa because Tampa had the very, 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 very end of the season had some decent results with backing into the divisional championship and then going to the playoffs and then upsetting Philadelphia, right? But if you look at the forecast of both teams, they're not that much different as far as the aging players here. You've got a well overpaid quarterback in Tampa with giving Baker Mayfield $100 million. So what I hate this whole knee-jerk reaction or short-term thing where the Saints are in trouble. The Bucs aren't in trouble just because the Bucs snuck into the playoff and won a playoff game. The structure of the franchises are relatively similar. So are the Saints in trouble? Or did the Saints just underperform last year and now we're looking at it like they're in some deep hole?
But the main question I have for Mickey Loomis and Dennis Allen is, where exactly is this franchise headed? Well, we're going to try and break it down in today's video. Okay. Now let's begin.
Yeah, let's rock.
We are starting today's video by discussing a couple of reasons why the Saints' future concerns me. Okay. One of the big reasons is the talent on this roster, or lack of. Yes, they have some very talented players like Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, Demario Davis, and of course Marshawn Lattimore, but I have a lot of concerns about the rest of the roster. I know people want to make this a Derek Carr thing and how he limits what the team can do because Carr is not an elite quarterback, and we will get to Derek Carr, but there are a lot bigger issues with this team than just Derek. I don't think Dennis Allen is a good coach, and if it came hell or high water with the season on the line, I wouldn't trust Dennis Allen to make good decisions and to put this team in a position to win a big game.
All right, let's go to the roster. So if we talk about the roster is at the very worst, I think, above average. If you're talking about Tyrann Mathieu, one of the best safeties in football, Marshawn Lattimore, one of the best cornerbacks in football, Demario Davis, one of the best linebackers in football, you've got obviously issues on the defensive line. You go offensively, Chris Olave, one of the best receivers in football, Alvin Kamara, one of the best running backs in football. You have Derek Carr, who, let's just call him an average quarterback. Let's just say he's average. Let's say he's the 14th best quarterback in the NFL, which is pretty low, I think. If you do all that, and then you also sprinkle in, Taysom Hill's a pretty unique player. Yeah, Rashid Shaheed's a pretty good player, Pro Bowl return guy. You do all that, it's like, well, actually the roster's not bad. Now, there are some huge glaring holes, sure. Offensive line, some spots on the defensive line. Some of our depth at wide receiver now that Michael Thomas is out. Sure, I can totally hear that. But we are nowhere near as bad roster-wise as a lot of other teams that you don't hear about. Like a lot of other teams that people would say are trending in the right direction or moving forward, the right way. I don't think we're that far off. I don't think the roster is elite by any means, but it's not bad. It's not a horrible roster. The coaching, Dennis Allen, is he a good head coach? No. He is a good defensive coach. We've definitely seen that. So what is Clint Kubiak going to bring? We don't know yet, but even the coaching, which I think is seen as a problem because Dennis Allen's head coaching record, which, him as a head coach is a problem. But if you look at him as just a defensive coach, one of the best defensive coaches in the NFL. So if Kubiak can boost the offense and do what Pete Carmichael couldn't do, which is just, navigate his way to the stadium, if he can do that, then we may fix that as well. So not a good start for this analysis.
Let alone what it would require to win a Super Bowl, which of course would be to win multiple big games. When you look at the Saints' 2023 season, the first thing you see is that they went 9-8 and nearly made the playoffs. But I would argue a 9-8 record for the 2023 Saints is pretty disappointing because of who their wins were over.
Yeah, 100%.
They started out 2-0 with wins over the Titans and Panthers, both teams who would finish with bottom 7 records in the league, and as we know, Carolina of course finished with the worst record in the league.
Yeah.
The Packers' loss in Week 3 was tough because of how that game played out with Derek Carr going down and Green Bay eventually coming back and beating New Orleans with a score of 18-17. I don't place a lot of blame on anybody in particular for that loss because when your starting quarterback goes down, it's tough for any team. But after that, their next 3 wins were over the Patriots, who have the number 3 overall pick in the 2024 draft, the Colts in Week 8, and the Bears in Week 9, who had an undrafted rookie quarterback starting for them in Tyson Bagent. Just because the Saints' future concerns me doesn't mean I won't give credit where it's due, because the Week 8 game against the Colts was one of the best offensive performances for any NFL team in 2023. Not just the Saints, but for any team. They had over 500 yards of offense and ran for over 150 yards as a team and put up 38 points on the road. That was a great win for them to get them back to 4-4. Eventually, they beat the Panthers, who we already discussed, and the Giants, who were led by Tommy DeVito, and ultimately a team that finished with the number 6 overall pick. Their final 2 wins were over the Bucs and Falcons, and again, credit where it's due, the Saints played a great team game against Tampa in Week 17. Truly. Atlanta's head coach was fired before midnight after the game, and they were largely done with the season. The point to all of this is this was a very easy schedule, all things.
Yeah, it was an easy schedule. It was a really easy schedule. It was a disappointing season. That is not up for debate. That is no doubt about it, right? Easiest schedule ever. We talked about it before the season. You could say the same thing for the Falcons. You could say the same thing for any of the teams in the South, where it's like, look, you're facing a really easy schedule. The Falcons won 7 games. A lot of people are saying the Falcons are going to go to the Super Bowl this year because they signed Kirk Cousins. All of a sudden, the Falcons are trending in the right direction, right? But people forget they won the same amount of games as the Bears last year. You're going to hear people say, well, the Falcons roster is better than the Saints. Is it? Is it better? We lost to Houston. If you look at some of our losses, the loss to Houston, basically let's just call it a last possession loss. The loss to Green Bay was crazy. Derek Carr gets hurt. We give up whatever it was, 18 unanswered points at the end of the game on the road. You flip just those 2 games, just those 2. You flip those, and all of a sudden we're an 11-win team. And is this video being made? I would argue no. If we're an 11-win NFC South champion team, this video probably isn't getting made. And that's my biggest problem with this kind of analysis is it the roster that's the problem? Or is it that the Saints lost a couple of coin flip games, they were a 9-win team, and that was it? Because I have a sneaky feeling no one would be saying this if we win just one more game. If we would have just not blown the Green Bay game, if Carr doesn't get hurt, and we're a 10-win NFC South champion team, probably isn't the case, right? And then if you look at Indy Indy probably should have won the division last year. They had a drop pass on 4th down against Houston, a wide open drop pass that basically they would have won the game. So, the win against Indy, the near loss against Houston, the near loss with Green Bay, like those are decent teams. And I like that's another thing too, where they're missing like this gray area. They're missing the middle. Am I saying the Saints are a Super Bowl level elite team? No. But not being a Super Bowl level elite team doesn't mean all of a sudden you're dog water. It doesn't mean you go from that to terrible. There is just average and above average. Like, it's okay if the Saints are average, or if they were average last year, which they were, 9-win team. I would say they were average. And they probably should have been above average. And this year, I think they probably should be above average again. I certainly don't think the Saints are an NFC South contender or an NFC contender. I think they're an NFC South contender. I don't think they're an NFC contender where we sit right here. Does that mean they're the worst team in the league? No. It means they are above average, just above average team. There's a whole lot of teams in the NFL that are an above average team, right? So, I don't think it's way too like one side or the other with a lot of this stuff. Teams can be in the middle. Teams can be average or above average or just kind of hanging out in that space.
Is considered. The lone playoff team they beat was the Buccaneers, and they only played 4 playoff teams in the 11 non-division games they had. They were against the Packers, Texans, Lions, and Rams. I will say the Packers game was not the same as the other 3 in terms of how everything played out, but the Saints were 0-4 against playoff teams that were not in the NFC South, 1-5 overall if you include the split against the Bucs. I think the most concerning part about the future of the Saints is they lost games last year they had no business losing, and if you can't make the playoffs in a year where a lot of things went in your favor, why would anyone believe in them moving forward? This team
Now, some of those losses are weird. Like, some of those losses, what do you do with, right? Like the Vikings. We lose by 1 possession, but we were getting absolutely destroyed that entire game, and our backup quarterback had to try and figure things out at the end. You look at the Lions game. We're getting absolutely obliterated, absolutely embarrassed. People are booing us 21-0 in the first minute of the game. But then we make it close. Jacksonville, we lose on a drop pass by Foster Moreau. So it's a weird thing because I don't think you can take the Detroit game or the Minnesota game and say, well, we probably should have won that. But at the same time, it's like, well, it was a 1-possession game. We did make it close, even though it wasn't our best performance. So, it's a really difficult year to judge. It really is. Because even some of our worst performances, like Detroit, there was a large amount of positive. And for a team like with Carr figuring things out and all the injuries we had, and it was just a real, the Pete Carmichael problem, all of that. It was a weird season in flux, even like on the offensive line. A lot of people moving around. The offensive line was horrible to start. We moved some pieces around, then it got kind of better. So it was a complex season for sure for the Saints, and it was underwhelming. I mean, we should have won more games, but I don't think. I mean, even like Marshawn Lattimore. Like Marshawn Lattimore gets hurt at the end of the season. Like there was just. It was one of those times where it was like a perfect storm of things just not working out for the Saints.
Went on the road to Minnesota and lost to Josh Dobbs during his Linsanity run and had a bye week after that game. What did they do after giving up 27 on the road to a Josh Dobbs-led team, who, by the way, didn't have Justin Jefferson either? You guessed it. They lost on the road by 2 scores to the Atlanta Falcons.
This was really
Granted,
bad.
2 scores there is 9 points, but technically it is still 2 scores.
Yeah.
Anyways, they lost to the Lions after the Falcons game, which put them at 5-7, and I know the Lions game was close on the scoreboard as Detroit won 33-28, but there's times where heading into games I feel pretty confident about a team winning, due in large part to coaching, and that was how I felt about the Lions when they went to New Orleans last year. I also felt that way a lot of the time about the Chargers, who of course were coached by Brandon Staley. But the point is, the Saints did a lot of things right in 2023. Finishing top 10 in both points per game offensively and defensively is nothing to scoff at. Hell, the Chiefs finished 15th in points per game offensively in 2023, so in theory, the Saints did something last year the Chiefs did not. Not only that, but the Saints also did a great job at taking care of the football, as they were 6th lowest in the NFL, as they committed just 18 turnovers on the year, while having 29 takeaways as a defense for a turnover margin of plus 11. The plus 11 turnover margin was third in the NFL behind the Ravens and Giants. And another concern I have with the Saints moving forward is if you finish top 10 in both points per game offensively and defensively, and you finish top 3 in turnover margin for the season, and you still don't make the playoffs, are things going to get better moving forward? Are you going to finish top 5 in points per game on both sides of the ball and finish with the best turnover margin in the entire NFL next year?
I mean, it's just so results. It's so results driven. So we're like, if you look at this, right, and you say, if you say that the Saints are ninth in points per game on offense, 8th in points per game on defense, and 3rd in turnover margin. If you heard that, you're like, all right, well, the Saints are looking fine. They're looking good. This right here is way more important. Those numbers right there are way more important to forecast a team than wins and losses. This is a much more true look at how the team is playing, than games that are determined by an injury or determined by a coin flip or determined by a field goal or determined by, we know how random an isolated game can be. So he's taken two things here, and he's like weighing the results way more than I think the actual metrics. If you look at these stats right here, you cannot then say the Saints roster is bad. You can't then say the team is bad. You can say that the results weren't there. You can say that they were unfortunate in certain areas or they didn't, however you want to phrase it. But the results don't carry over. Like the 9-win season doesn't carry over. These metrics carry over. Like these metrics and the style and all that stuff of how the efficiency of the team and things like that, that's what carries over. They lost to Green Bay because Derek Carr goes down, they give up the second half lead. That's an isolated incident. That is an isolated game that we lose on the road, injury, a lot of stuff happened, right? So that happened there in that vacuum, but once that happens, it's over. Once it happens, you just move on. This is what I look at. I look at this kind of stuff for the Saints. And I don't think you can look at this and say that this is anything worse than an average team. I mean, if you look at this, it's an above average team.
Per game on both sides of the ball and finish with the best turnover margin in the entire NFL next year? Probably not, no. I also have my concerns with the level of talent on the roster, and I worry about how the Saints are going to fare in the NFC South with not just the Bucs, but now the Falcons. I don't think this should be a hot take, but I think Kirk Cousins is a much better quarterback than Derek Carr, and as we know, the Falcons have a lot of talent on offense. I truly think Atlanta can win the NFC South in 2024, and I also like where the Bucs are. Carolina, of course, is a work in progress, and I think they will eventually get there, but
he likes where the Bucs are because they won the division last year. But you could say the exact same thing. It's just crazy to me that you can go through this, say the Saints are 9th in offense, 8th in defense, or whatever it was, and you can look at the 7-win Falcons, who you could argue had an easier schedule than the Saints. And they won 7 games. And our roster, he says, oh, well, the Saints, I don't know if the talent is there on the Saints roster. And he's looking at the 7-win Falcons, who, easier schedule. He's looking at the 7-win Falcons, and he's like, oh, yeah, a lot of talent on this roster. Why? Answer me that. I don't know. Because Kirk Cousins is coming? Okay. If Kirk Cousins is an upgrade over Desmond Ridder, no doubt about it. How much better is Kirk Cousins than Derek Carr? Debatable. I would say, I've said this before, but if Carr is the 13th overall quarterback, I would have Cousins at the 10th. It's like, I don't think it's a huge jump. It's not if Cousins leads the Falcons if he goes +3, all right, +3 in the wins category, if he takes them from 7 wins to 10 wins, sweet. Like the Saints can go from 9 wins to 10 wins next year if everyone stays healthy and Kubiak is better than Carmichael or whatever. It's just, I think this is a good example of someone who doesn't watch these teams. If you sit there and say you like where the Bucs are at with aging players, horrible head coach very similar to Dennis Allen, good defensive head coach, horrific on offense, an overpaid quarterback. You're looking at that because the Buccaneers lucked into the division. And then you're looking at the Falcons, who were somehow more disappointing than the Saints, who were somehow did less with an easier schedule than the Saints. If you're looking at those two teams and you're like, oh, yeah, I love where these two teams are going. And you look at the Saints and you're like, nah, I'm not really feeling that one. It's crazy. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Question what the long-term vision is with the Saints. Does anyone actually think we are going to see Derek Carr and Dennis Allen on the podium on Super Bowl Sunday with Terry Bradshaw or Jim Nantz or whoever up there being crowned Super Bowl champions?
Does anyone here think that we're going to see Baker Mayfield and Todd Bowles on the stage with Jimmy Johnson being crowned Super Bowl champion? Does anybody here think we're going to see Kirk Cousins and Raheem Morris on the stage being crowned Super Bowl champions? Like, they're all interchangeable. I don't think any of those coach quarterback combos are going to be on the stage with Jimmy Johnson getting crowned Super Bowl champion. No, I don't. And you could say, oh, well, Carr is getting overpaid. Carr is this, Carr is that. Kirk Cousins, was he 36 years old coming off an Achilles injury? They're going to be paying this cat until he's 40 years old? Like, they're going to be paying him $50 million a year or whatever until he's 40? You don't think that's an overpaid contract? You don't think that's a questionable contract? Baker Mayfield, who's been a journeyman his entire career, you give him 3 years, $100 million when Joe Flacco gets signed for nothing? There's issues everywhere. And then the coaches. Raheem Morris already failed as a head coach. We don't know how he's going to do. Todd Bowles, one of the worst head coaches in the NFL. Dennis Allen, one of the worst head coaches in the NFL. I mean, it's not... These teams are interchangeable. They're very, very similar to their structure, too, with Tampa dealing with aging players. I mean, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and that whole situation. You look at the Falcons. How good are these talented players that this guy's talking about? How good is Drake London? How good is Kyle Pitts? I mean, Bijan was good, but I don't think there's that much difference with Drake London, like the package of Drake London, Kirk Cousins, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts. Like, I don't think that combination is that much better, if better, than Derek Carr, Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, and then whoever else you want to throw in there, whether it's Taysom Hill or Rashid Shaheed or however you want to do it. Like, I just don't think there's that much separating these teams at all.
I personally do not, and I don't think that should be a hot take either. Now, unfortunately, as I was making this video, Ian Rappaport tweeted that the Saints are preparing for the real possibility that offensive tackle Ryan Ramczyk is medically not able to play this season. There's a lot going on here, but from a draft standpoint, I thought the signing of Chase Young gave a pretty clear indication that the Saints were probably going to draft an offensive lineman at pick 14.
Yeah, probably.
Now, with the Ramczyk news coming out, I think the probability of the Saints drafting an offensive lineman jumps up even higher, and to be honest, I would be surprised if they, in fact, do not draft an offensive lineman at pick 14.
Yeah, they probably will.
I don't think Trevor Penning is good, and I was not a fan of him coming out of Northern Iowa, and I thought the Cowboys' Tyler Smith was a much better prospect. There is a real possibility the Saints draft Penn State's Olu Fashanu if he is available. The timing of this Ramczyk news relative to when the video is coming out, which is on Thursday, March 28th, is ironic, but even in the best case scenario and Ryan plays in 2024 and starts all 17 games, I don't think anything changes for the Saints in terms of where they are as a franchise.
I don't think it changes either way. I don't think it changes if he's out. I don't think it changes if he's there. Because we didn't have him at the end of last season anyways, and we understand the situation with his knee. Like, it is not... We didn't just learn of this today. We're getting updates on this. The Saints are going, I covered this in a video earlier this week, but the Saints are going to be moving forward with their plan and their roster building strategy regardless of Ryan Ramczyk. It's too volatile of a situation to not address it. So it's going to be addressed. I mean, I don't think, if he plays, cool. If he doesn't play, we're going to have a contingency plan in place.
When looking at their 2024 schedule, you obviously know who 6 of their 17 games will be and where they will be played, but they have some difficult games on the schedule, and those include, but are not limited to, at Kansas City, at Dallas, at the LA.
KC's a good example. KC's one, not KC. The Chargers are a good example of where it's like, the games he's showing, by the way, are at Kansas City, at Green Bay, at Dallas, at the Chargers. The Chargers are interesting because the Chargers are one of those teams that every single year, it's like the Chargers are going to take a step. The Chargers are good. The Chargers are going to do this. The Chargers are built to win. They don't do nothing. They don't do nothing, never. And we don't ever hear that the Chargers are in trouble. Why? Because they have Justin Herbert, who people assume is good. Is he? Is Justin Herbert good? Is Justin Herbert worth $250 million? Because Justin Herbert hasn't won nothing. So the idea that the Chargers are this franchise who are in a great space after they just got rid of basically their entire offense, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, they don't have any receivers. They don't have anything. All they have is Justin Herbert, who people prop up as like this franchise quarterback, this guy, because we're supposed to believe he's really good, and he might be. But the Los Angeles Chargers, from a roster standpoint, are not any further along than the Saints at all. And I'll tell you this too. This title, the New Orleans Saints are in a very difficult situation. The Los Angeles Chargers are in a very difficult situation because they have to rebuild their entire roster while paying their quarterback $250 million. Okay? So this is and then like Dallas is good. Cool. Dallas is sweet. The Dallas Cowboys are in a very difficult situation. Here's their difficult situation. They can't win a playoff game. They're winning 12, 13 games a season and then getting absolutely dog walked in the playoffs at home by Green Bay. Oh, here's another problem Dallas Cowboys have. Who's their running back? Tony Pollard, see you later. He was terrible. Ezekiel Elliott, he's been gone for a few years. Dak Prescott isn't even, his contract situation is weird. They're not even negotiating with him. Dak Prescott could have the biggest dead cap hit in NFL history if they don't get a contract worked out. And right now, we're not so sure if they are. So, are the Dallas Cowboys in a great situation? They have Mike McCarthy as their head coach. Okay? You think Dennis Allen's bad? Mike McCarthy's just as bad. All right? Kansas City, obviously, yes, they are sweet. Green Bay, could have got him last year. I think Green Bay is good. Is Green Bay's roster that much better than the Saints? No. Is Josh Jacobs that much better than Alvin Kamara? No. Is Romeo Doubs better than Chris Olave? No. You know, like, it's one of those things where, why do people like Green Bay? Because they came on strong at the end of last year. People think Jordan Love is really good. Is he really good? I don't know. The Saints should have beat Green Bay last year. We didn't. Derek Carr got hurt. We gave up 18 points in the second half. We didn't score a point. We were up 17-0. So how do you score that? I don't know. But I don't think Green Bay is in a much better situation than the Saints. I certainly don't think the Chargers are. Right now, I would say the Saints are better than the Chargers. I mean, you know, it's just crazy. It's crazy to sit here and be like the Chargers are in a better situation than the Saints. The Chargers are in a great situation. Why?
Those include, but are not limited to, at Kansas City, at Dallas, at the LA Chargers, and at Green Bay. One of my biggest concerns from the Saints' 2023 season was how easy their schedule was relative to a lot of other teams, and they still didn't get to the playoffs. I would be shocked if the Saints make the playoffs in 2024 with a perceived more difficult schedule and improved division play. And that's yet another reason why their future concerns me, and that's a big reason why I was never a fan of the Derek Carr signing. Derek Carr finished the 2023 season with 25 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, and that looks pretty solid at first glance. But what you may not know is how frustrated Saints fans were at times with Carr throughout the 2023 season, rightfully so by the way, and that his numbers in the last few games of the year really did a lot of heavy pulling to get those final numbers looking good.
Which, I'll defend Derek Carr here, where at the beginning of the season, there was a lot of growing pains, there was a lot of learning pains and all that stuff. How much of that was a Pete Carmichael problem? Probably a lot. And I would say that if Carr comes along at the end of the year, when he's healthy and figuring out the locker room and figuring out the system and figuring out his team and all of that, I would much rather him, whatever this guy said, pull his weight at the end of the season than sporadically through the beginning. Like, I think Carr showed a lot towards the end there. Again, I don't think Carr is a top 8 quarterback, but I don't think he's any worse than 14, 15, somewhere in there. So If you told me that Derek Carr is an average quarterback or slightly above average, I would say, yep, that's probably about right. If you told me that Kirk Cousins is an above average quarterback, I would say, yeah, that's probably about right. If you told me Baker Mayfield was an average to below average quarterback, I would say, yeah, that's probably about right. So, again, I don't think Carr is an issue at all. I don't think controversial yet brave, but I think the upgrade from Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke to Kirk Cousins could be similar to our upgrade from Pete Carmichael to Clint Kubiak. If Clint Kubiak comes in and he's one of the best offensive coordinators in the NFL, Pete Carmichael was the worst offensive coordinator in the NFL last year. So who knows how big that bump can be? And again, if that bump is one game for us, 2 games for us, all of a sudden we're a 10-win, 11-win team. If Kirk Cousins, think about how good Kirk Cousins has to be. If he bumps the Falcons up 4 games, they're right there with us. 11-win team. Like, the Falcons were bad. 7 wins with their schedule last year. They're in a difficult situation. That's what they're in. You got a first-time offensive coordinator. You got a new head coach. You got a quarterback with an Achilles injury. You got a team who won 7 games last year. It's almost like this guy flipped a coin and was like, all right, are we going to say the Saints are in a difficult situation or the Falcons? Flip. Okay. And tails never fails. We're going with the Saints.
Through the first 12 games of Carr's Saints career, he threw just 11 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, and when you sign a 4-year, $150 million contract, that is not going to cut it. But in the final 5 games of the 23 season, Carr threw 14 touchdowns to 2 interceptions against 3 non-playoff teams, in which the Saints, not surprisingly, won those games by double digits. And again, in credit to New Orleans for beating Tampa in Week 17, I do not want that to go unnoticed. But Derek throwing 4 touchdowns in a Week 18 game against the Falcons, against a team that had a bad 2023 season, does not move me and make me think that Carr will come out firing in 2024 and throw for 35 touchdowns and lead the Saints to 12 wins. I think
it's crazy that the guy's like, him throwing 4 touchdowns against the Falcons doesn't do anything for me because the Falcons had a bad season, even though the Saints had a bad season. And then coming around and saying like it's one of those things where it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, because he's saying it doesn't impress me that he's throwing these touchdowns against the Falcons. And then in the same breath, he's saying, I like the talent on the Falcons I like the talent on the Falcons roster. I think the Falcons are going to win the NFC South. I say, okay, well, you just dismissed Derek Carr carving up your projected NFC South champions. It's like, oh, well, the Falcons didn't have a great season last year. Neither did the Saints. Balances out, doesn't it? So how are you just going to and didn't he talk about the Falcons? Didn't he talk about the Saints losing to the Falcons by 2 scores after the Vikings game? Why didn't he dismiss that? If the Falcons had a bad season, he dismisses Derek Carr throwing 4 touchdowns against the Falcons in Week 18, but he doesn't dismiss the Falcons beating the Saints by 2 possessions after the Vikings game.
Didn't like this signing to begin with because I thought it was a multi-year and a $150 million commitment to delay the inevitable, which of course is a rebuild. Admittedly, I also hated the trade they made back in 2022 with the Eagles, which was to acquire another first-round pick during the 2022 draft that ultimately came with a significant cost. New Orleans received the 16th and 19th overall picks in the 22 draft, which, like they have for seemingly ever, they plan for right now and never the future, while in return, Philly got pick 18, pick 101, which was a 3rd-round comp, a 7th-round pick, their 2023 1, and their 2024 2. New Orleans' roster isn't exactly loaded with talent, and them having their 2nd-round pick in this class would go a long way. They have a 2nd-round pick in the 2024 draft, which is from the Sean Payton trade, but they also gave up their 3rd-round pick in the process. So in a pretty loaded draft class, they have 2 selections in the top 145 picks, which is pretty disappointing.
They can still maneuver. I mean, they could still maneuver, trade down, get some picks. I mean, this is never set in stone. Let me ask you this. Who's the worst contract? Who has the worst contract between Carr, Mayfield, and Cousins? I would argue Carr has the best out of those 3. I would argue that's the best contract situation out of those 3. The Mayfield one is absolutely ridiculous. So when you look at Carr's contract and you say it's 4 years, $150 million, and you look around at the market and how quarterbacks are paid, it is what it is. Like it's not like the Baker Mayfield is 3 years, $100 million. So 4 years, $150 million for Derek Carr. Sounds about right to me. Market value is what it is. You have to have a quarterback in the NFL. You got to pay him. It's nothing. It's not a talking point anymore. If you want a top 15, 16 quarterback in the NFL and you didn't draft them, you're going to have to pay them. And if you compare Cousins' contract with Mayfield's contract, with Carr's contract, even if you don't think one is worse than the other, they're all pretty much the same.
I do think the Saints should go offensive line with their first-round pick, and I would love for them to draft a receiver with their second-round pick, and the good news for New Orleans is this receiver class is loaded. I don't think Derek Carr is a great quarterback, and I know Saints fans feel the same way, but the situation he's in isn't good either. Chris Olave is, of course, a talented player and a guy a lot of other NFL teams would love to have, but there were times last year where the Saints could not run the football, and that was a problem.
Yeah, it is an issue. Yes, 100%. It is definitely an issue. We can't run the football. We have to figure that out. Okay. Every team has holes, especially teams that win 9 games. Like teams that win 9 games have issues. We have a couple issues. Issues are can't stop the run and we can't run the football. But if we get those solved, we get that fixed, things will be fine.
There's a reason they finished 31st in yards per carry as a team, and that both Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams had less than 4 yards per carry. There's a reason Jamal Williams' lone rushing touchdown came in the Week 18 game against the Falcons from the victory formation. When you look at their defensive roster, Cam Jordan will be 35 this year, and so will Demario Davis.
Demario Davis was a top 5 linebacker in the NFL last year.
I know some people probably would want me to say the Cam Jordan decline has already started, as he had just 2 sacks in 2023.
He was hurt.
He was hurt for a lot of the year and played through it. But even if he had a 12-sack season instead of a 2-sack season, or even if he had the best year of his career, he's not going to play forever. I would be very surprised if Chase Young is the long-term answer, and that contract is very much a 1-year prove-it deal.
Yeah.
Tyrann Mathieu will also be 32 years old, and I like their first-round pick from 2023 in Brian Brzee, but is he a one-man wrecking crew? No. I don't see how this team is going to seriously compete in 2024, and there's been seemingly countless decisions over the past few years that, even at the time, were bad decisions that could have been prevented. Most notably the Eagles trade and signing Derek Carr to a long-term deal. There was a reason there weren't many suitors for Derek Carr, and what's funny about that signing is the Saints shut out the Raiders in 2022 when they came to the Superdome. Derek threw one of the ugliest interceptions in that game you'll see at the NFL level, as he threw a pass across the middle right into a Saints player's arms without looking. And the Saints watched that happen, looked at him getting benched in the 2022 season, and said, "We want 4 years of that." This roster is aging, they don't have a lot of draft capital, they're already not winning in a bad division, and they haven't been to the playoffs in over 3 years. This is one of the worst situations in all of football. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe.
Look, I don't know what to tell you. It is absolutely not one of the worst situations in football. No doubt about it. 9-win team, disappointing last year, sure. Are they an elite team? No. Saints are probably above average, to average. That's about it. Nothing crazy.
Anyone with $10,000
no better or no worse than the Falcons or any of their situations. This is just, and at the end of the day, his argument is the Saints are in a bad situation because I think so. Because I don't like Derek Carr. I cannot believe that video. There was nothing to it. There was no substance to it. It was strictly they won 9 games. They won 9 games in a bad... really think about it. His talking points were they won 9 games against a bad schedule. They signed Derek Carr to a long-term contract, and he didn't like the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson trade from a few years ago. Then he turns around and says, but I love the Falcons, who won 7 games against an easier schedule and signed Kirk Cousins to a long-term contract. Like the Falcons, who did worse in a lot of ways and are in a similar situation to us in a lot of other ways, he thinks they're solid. He thinks they're in a great situation. He thinks they're going to roll through the NFC South. They're just going to absolutely take over. It just seems weird. It just made no sense to me. Absolutely no sense to me. I mean, it was just a shocking video, really. But ladies and gentlemen, this guy writing on the board, what's going on here? I don't know. Go in the comments below. Let me know what you think about this. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.